We ought to start because we have got a lot to get through. But maybe we should introduce ourselves first of all. So
yes.
You are Laura.
I'm Laura. I have been at Kokoro for a very long time, and for the last 3 years have focused on leading the score, the qualitative side of things. So I look after our community and bring kind of the stories from consumers' mouths.
And we will describe in a moment what the score is, because a lot of people won't be familiar with that. I'm Alison, founder of Kokoro. So I've been doing this a very long time. But really focused on the score for the last few years. So that's been really nice, actually, to be able to kind of make something absolutely focus and an area of passion. But Laura, I know we've got many new people along today. So why don't you just explain what the score is? Because it's an unusual product. People really struggle to kind of understand what we do.
Yeah, well, it's a subscription product. So hello to all of our subscribers who are listening. But yes, I know there are some new people listening with us today as well. The score, essentially, we would say is brilliant content. It is an insight product. We are constantly kind of trying to uncover the mood of the nation now and where it will move next. We have hugely robust quantitative sample every single week, speaking to a different 2,000 people. So we're now over 330,000 people, and there's a qualitative arm as well as 50 households that we track and check in with on a frequent basis, and essentially we're just looking at what's moving. Clients and subscribers ask us questions, set us kind of briefs and things, and we constantly look at what we'd like to uncover and what we'd like to know about.
That, Laura, is how much we anticipate, like, you know, quite into the distance, because we're looking at the here and now so closely and the factors that are influencing the here and now. So a really nicely anticipatory kind of feel to the score's outputs. But this is why we exist, isn't it? To understand that big world that's going on.
Yeah, absolutely. So Kokoro, as an agency, we run a lot of insight projects. They tend to be bespoke, kind of brief driven work, and that was our background for a very long time until we started the score. And so often all of those briefs very naturally focus on the client, the product, the proposition, the service, kind of your customers. With the score, what we attempt to do is lift your heads, kind of open your eyes and take in the kind of consumer, a kind of broader space, understanding that whole kind of messy web of their lives. And we always talk about the zero-sum game, which is never more true than in a cost of living crisis, that actually something that's impacting way outside of your sector or sort of perceived sphere of control can be causing kind of ripples and impacts with your customers.
And I think you're absolutely right, Laura, and that is why this is really good at anticipating the future, because you understand the things that are happening over there that are eventually going to impact on your sector or nuance what is required of your sector. So that is why we exist. And boy, do we cover a lot of ground.
Yeah, we absolutely do. I mean, we talk about tracking life, and so we look at the consumer kind of holistically, and that takes us in all sorts of turns every single week. We set ourselves some different big questions, look at different topics, and that means that we are kind of constantly revisiting a very broad section of topics.
And what it gives us is that longitudinal data set, which means that we don't just have to ask people what they're doing, we can kind of observe really the changes, which is a much more accurate way, of course, of looking at what's going on. Laura, we have got a lot of content to share today.
We absolutely have got a lot. I mean, the score generally has got a lot of content. We're kind of constantly producing things. We've got video content, we write reports, we run webinars like this. Today, you're going to get a slice of our webinars, and we are going to take it fast. If you've got questions, we'd love to hear them, but we're not going to visit them in the session. So write them in the chat or the questions, and we will revisit them at a later point. Get back to you. You are going to get a slice with our webinar, and don't feel like you've got to be screenshotting and scribbling and all of those sorts of things. Very generous. We will give you a copy of the slides and of this so that you can revisit what we've talked about. And for any subscribers listening as well, we've got some bonus content in that we've got a video
to bring the whole thing to life.
The whole thing to life from consumers' mouths, some of our Vox Pops, people from the community.
Okay, so that is who we are, why we're here.
Yeah.
Let's get started.
And you will just be sent that at the end of the session.
I don't even have to. Because we always have an absolute
no.
people trying to get hold of us. Okay, we've assumed people want it because
we've assumed
about 90% of people do want it. It's always okay. Very good. Right, Laura, let's frame the whole session. Optimism, this is one of the lead metrics we've looked at all the way through the history of the score. And of course, it was a metric we looked at before the score. And we knew that net optimism ran at about 45%. It's had lots of ups and downs over the last 3 years, an absolute roller coaster, of course, of a period. We are happily on a little bit of an upward trajectory, which is why we really wanted to do this webinar at this point in time.
Yeah, we are. I mean, we talk a lot about momentum being important. It's the direction of travel, not the absolute size of something. And so that climb that we've been on over the past few months, I think, is important. It is making us feel that little bit lighter. Of course, you know, we reflect on the weather. It's not just the sunshine, I think, that's doing this. It's what the sunshine is unlocking for that. Yeah. And that is kind of a little bit more sort of possibility, a bit more kind of joy, affordable plans, all of those sorts of things we're going to come on and talk about. But it is happy, I think, to see it go to those sorts of levels. We should just say that normal optimism is 45%.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, so why don't we try and unpick for people the sort of journey of the last 3 years in a really elevated way, and understand some of the factors at play that really shape, I think, that whole globe and what's going on within it. And I think you could summarize it as messy. A lot has happened. It's been a turbulent 3 years. And we want to just give a sense of where we're at the end of that time. Important to note, 335,000 interviews done over that period of time, 2,000 people every single week. It gives us a phenomenal data set and really smooth lines. And I think you can see things that you wouldn't stand a chance of spotting if you weren't interviewing all of the time. Also, Laura, your 50 plus households that you talk to qualitatively and track over that period. So real depth as well.
Yeah, real depth, real stories
to it. Okay, so the first chart here is my life feels normal, a metric we've had on the survey from day one. You can see it's a wiggly line, goes ups and downs. I think it's worth just moving to the far right-hand side of that, just to say that after this 3-year period, our life still isn't normal, and it's been more normal at other points over the last 3 years. Laura, that often surprises people, doesn't it?
Yeah, I mean, Freedom Day.
Freedom Day.
Freedom Day. What they were doing.
No one wanted to happen.
There were an incredible number of signs, places. People were really sort of hotly debating it. It was the kind of thing that you couldn't bring up with something like colleagues or something like that, because, you know, who knows who thinks what and all of those sorts of things. We were absolutely miles from normal and yet closer than we find ourselves today. Of course, they were very different constraints back then. Now we've got new, fresh constraints.
So let's look at those constraints maybe. Okay, so the first constraint that stopped life feeling normal, of course, was COVID and our health as a constraint. So turquoise line here is still my life feels normal. The deaths, sadly, from COVID are the bars underneath of that. And you can see every time we got a big spike in waves, then life did not feel normal again. And a really telling one was that Omicron wave at the end of 2021, where that came through. It actually was much milder and not so many people died, but life still really didn't feel normal at that time. Anyway, that went up until March 2022, really important point to kind of bear in mind. And from that period onwards, COVID was much less of a concern to us. That wasn't the thing that stopped life being normal. Yet we can see the proportion of people saying life wasn't normal continued to fall. So the thing that happened after that point in time was that inflation started to build. And that's the bars on this chart here. So we show consumer price index. And really that started to elevate, got to a critical point. And as that inflation held, then more and more people felt life wasn't normal. So two really big forces at play.
Yeah, consumers talk about this as well. They talk about it almost in the sense that one storm started, a new storm started before another one ended, that kind of sensation. We have really got these two crashing together.
We didn't really recognise at the time that these storms were kind of coming and going. So a lot of kind of very mixed feelings as a result of that. Now, for those people who have watched us present over the last 3 years, we've talked a lot about these three big forces, haven't we? And we talked about them right from the very early days of the pandemic: dispersion, exhaustion, and inequality. Now, we believe these are still very much at play, and we're going to take a look at sort of the new version of each of these things. So firstly, dispersion, Laura. Now, describe, it's a funny word, but what did we mean by dispersion?
The movement of the point of consumption from our kind of old life of being out in the world and amongst other people to maybe being quite isolated, either at home or just kind of on our own. And this has sort of morphed, I think, into something else, which is, even at this point, we are very drawn to time on our own, to me time over connecting with others, which, when you think about the journey that we've been on and what people were talking about at various phases over the last 3 years, feels surprising.
Yeah, it does. And why is it that we want that me time?
I think so much of it is about sort of protecting ourselves. We're very conscious of our energy. We're going to come and talk about exhaustion, but also protecting our spend. You know, if you are quite drawn to yourself, you decide the rules. You know, you're not being sort of pressured or bullied into spending more. If you are spending, you can enjoy every single inch of that. I also think some of the anxieties as well. You know, I've talked to you about, you know, one of the worst things you can ask people is, what have you been up to? We're going to come on and talk about kind of why that is. But I think there is a sense of, well, I've not been doing enough, so what am I going to talk about?
Yeah, absolutely. And incidentally, people don't always recognize that they're not doing very much in the first instance, and they'll say, I've been very busy, and then you'll go, well, what have you been busy doing? And then it's like,
oh, you know,
it falls apart at that point. Anyway, dispersion has become V2. It was that we were forced to be dispersed, and now we're actually choosing that sense of withdrawal. So the second thing was exhaustion. And of course, we were exhausted by the first part of the pandemic, the constant kind of in and out of lockdown and tears and all that kind of thing. Interestingly, more recently, we are still worn out. That sort of is still high. But the thing that's taken over from that is exhaustion with the system around us. And it is fair to say, I think people do describe it as broken on many levels.
Yeah, I think because almost at any point they turn, I hear so many stories from the community, really sad ones. I've got someone in the community who's nervous about a son. He's got a big sort of skin condition that's impacting his confidence. They've got an appointment. It's 75 weeks away. You know, we're seeing insurance premiums go up by £100 for people who've been loyal to insurance companies. They're trying to get through to speak to someone and can't get past the chatbot. We've got politicians kind of doing their own thing, ignoring the rules, a kind of sense that service isn't maybe where it used to be. We're being knocked sideways by prices, you know, feeling like, oh, when did that happen? And then Netflix has locked us out as well. And I think it just sort of feels that sort of every turn things just aren't quite right.
Are somewhat broken. And then thirdly, then inequality. Now, again, in pandemic times, there was an inequality. We talked about same stool on different boats, didn't we? And that inequality was really that richer people were able to buy their way into sort of nicer times during lockdown. What we're now discovering is the cost of living crisis also is breeding inequality, and particularly around pay and pay increases. So chart on the left-hand side is a proportion of people who say they've been given a 5% plus pay increase. And of course, that still doesn't match inflation, but it closes the gap with inflation. You can see that grows considerably as you move up the income. So we were always in different boats, but the boats have got even more different.
Yeah, absolutely. We're increasingly in different boats. And that's the difference between feeling slightly on an even keel, slightly in control, and feeling like you are constantly losing ground every month. They're very different sensations.
Yeah. So I want to say early on, Laura, that we have been called kind of doom merchants, that we are low sometimes. I think we would like to see that we are truth seekers, and maybe we tell the story, not even of the underdog, but more the average person in the UK. Whereas I think an awful lot of people in our own friendship circles, and certainly in working situations, they're never in the average boat or the lower boat. They have got the bigger boat. And so we think it's important to tell that story.
Yeah, absolutely.
But I think we also dwell on sort of problems to fix, because in those problems there are opportunities for brands. And sometimes people don't always see that in our chapters that we pull together. But I think you're just highlighting that we do in our personal life.
Oh, we do in life all of the time. You get handed a curveball and you make it into something good. If you end up working late or getting delayed on a train, well, that might mean that you can get a takeaway tonight rather than cook the thing out the freezer. You know, a friend cancelling plans means that you genuinely could sit in bed until whatever time watching Netflix. You know, we do this all the time. We leap from pain point to opportunity very, very, very quickly within our own lives. Of course, you know, it's easier if you're on kind of the right side of things. But I think we do this very simply. Doing this for other people, doing this with some of the other opportunities and our jobs and things like that can be more challenging.
And people can just see that we're being negative, but we don't do it from a position of negativity.
Yes, so today is about Opportunity.
Revealing opportunities for brands, absolutely. So let's return to that different boat. So here we look at optimism in families across the 3 income groups. We can see, if you look at that yellow line there, low levels of optimism, and it's not really improving there. So all of that overall growth in optimism that we're seeing is really coming from high, and it's somewhat from mid-income groups. So again, just highlighting that inequality. And I think, Laura, this is why, again, sometimes when we present to very senior teams, they go, is life really like that? It's not like that where I live. And I don't see that in the pubs and restaurants around me. And of course, those people will live in areas of concentration, probably very high affluence people. And of course, they won't be seeing life necessarily as it actually is. You're now roasting us in here.
Yeah, I'm trying not to roast us, but that is tricky. So I'm just going to press some buttons.
Okay, so we've got different boats playing out. We just want to highlight a couple of other things, that we are trying to navigate our way through this 3-year kind of journey here at personal level. But at the same time, we really feel that the system around us is less trusted and cares less about us. And we highlight 2 kind of important groups of people. Firstly, the government. So net trust ratings in the government, of course, moved into very, very deep negative territory through the latter part of the Johnson era, through Truss. And even with Sunak, it's not really kind of improved very much. At best, you could say it's kind of stable. But the upshot is most people don't think the government really care about us too much at the moment.
No, I think there's been a lot of scandals, as you can see over on the right hand side. A lot of these have kind of really stuck, but they've kicked around in the press as well. You know, actually the beginning of Partygate was sort of 18 months ago. It's still coverage now, and it's kind of another moment where there's one rule for us and another for them, and a sort of sense of where's the sort of standard, where's who's looking forwards, why aren't, you know, that sort of sensation. I think, and we can't have trust in something that's not kind of getting to work.
Yeah, absolutely. And in some ways, this is not a new story, as it we've been sort of used to this now, a decline in sort of trust in the government. But a more recent failing in terms of people there to care for us is from a brand perspective. And it's, as brands have been forced to put their prices up to cope with inflation themselves, we can see that that's really impacted on their own trust ratings. And we pull out an example here of net trust in supermarkets. I mean, they're absolute heroes of the early days of the pandemic, but as they've had to put prices up, you can really see that it's impacted on their trust ratings. So we've got the government that we can't trust, and now we've got brands who we thought were on our side, and now we're not sure we can trust them either.
I think there's a sense of sort of vigilance when using brands now. We sort of notice price points that make us sort of deeply inhale when, you know, we're noticing shrinkflation, we're noticing anti-theft on things that we think, oh my goodness, that's how much prices are skyrocketing by. Just sort of surprising prices, moments whereby it genuinely feels this thing's got way smaller. I can see the back of the pizza box. It always used to look full, you know, prices kind of going up on a weekly basis. I think that we can't feel like someone's got our back if when we're going around we've got to check and double check every single time. It's removed the autopilot, and it's very difficult to feel comfortable then.
It is. And, you know, I think just when we ask people directly about what is the cause of inflation, then sort of greedflation, people sort of profiteering on the back of the cost of living crisis, is right up there. So people really do think that, you know, these brands are not supporting us in the way that they did. Okay, so that's kind of how we're feeling. Let's look how it's impacting on what we're doing. So we know very, very often there is a big gap between what people claim to do and what they actually do at a moment in time. And so, you know, people could be saying, I'm going to do things to mitigate price increases. We'll demonstrate on this chart here that there were 2 trigger moments where people moved beyond saying and actually did make changes. So we look first in terms of the Aldi uses at the top of there from March 2022, that crossover point where we began to be less worried about COVID, but started to really notice inflation. Then you can just see that's where we got the growth in usage of Aldi really sort of kicking up at that moment in time. And then we got another really important trigger point around October 2022, which is when the second lot of energy price hikes came came in, and that caused people to kind of really think again. And frozen was a good example of that. We don't tend to buy frozen so much over the summer, but we come into winter and really got a sharp increase of that. We often see it decline slightly over the summer months. It's held up. So a narrowing of say-do gaps have occurred. Laura, that would be one example, a couple of examples I've given there. In reality, we know people are doing a whole load of mitigating actions. The difficult thing for consumers is, despite all of that, we can see on the left-hand side, the proportion of people who've got savings that they're able to add to is under pressure still. That's difficult.
It's really difficult, because I think you could look on that at the one hand and think, oh my goodness, imagine we hadn't done all those things. Imagine where we'd be then. But that's not how it feels. What it feels like is a lot of action, small things becoming big in our world, a lot of sort of thinking, a lot of conversation, a lot of quite dull conversation sometimes. And we feel like we've lost ground. That's difficult.
Yeah, it is a difficult sensation. So, you know, here's the thing. We've described that, you know, exhaustion, inequality, you know, dispersion. We've talked about people got less savings, but we said at the beginning that optimism was actually going up at the moment. So that sounds very contradictory. And there's one very easy explanation for it, isn't it? That we've got used to this game and we've become increasingly good at playing the game, if you like. And here is the evidence of that, and really important, I think, slide to just focus on here. We're beginning to adapt, and in adapting, we feel we can cope, and therefore we can begin to see a way forward. And the way we're coping is moving towards a quiet life. So it's less home-based, slightly less home-based now. We want to get out, but the things that we choose to do when we go out are very affordable things. And they're all on the left-hand side, aren't they, Laura? And I think walking is very significant, isn't it? We walked and walked and walked through the pandemic, yet we're at peak walks.
Still going, yes.
But what we do now is go for a walk and a little bit of food.
Yeah, and I think that it's those sort of affordable things, but also things that can feel slightly fresher. We might be mixing up those routines. We've talked a little bit about kind of food trucks and those sorts of things feeling maybe a little bit more exciting. But I think, you know, it is that quite wholesome existence. These are quite simple pleasures that we have come to know help us play this game that we're in at the moment.
And by going out and seeing other people, crowded, joy of the crowd, we've talked about
joy of strangers.
Then that's all very good for our kind of feel good. On the right hand side, though, we look at the things we're not doing, and the recurring theme, we could show many more, are these the things that cost us money. These are the things that we're beginning to avoid. So we're adapting, we're coping, but it feels good to be doing some of those things.
Yeah, absolutely. I think these are the things that do feel good, but we need to keep sort of control. I think that's the sensation that we've got.
That's the sensation. Okay, and so the final chart in this section, I've seen the benefits of slower life and intend to continue. Well, we've led a very slow life for a very long period of time, but it's interesting, Laura, that we are at peak slow life here and now, and this is what we say we want. And why do we say it?
I think, well, partly you've got to endorse what you're doing.
Yeah,
you've got to, you know, that's exactly how I was hoping that would go. Thank you. It's the kind of thing that's, and that's a natural kind of human thing. We want validation. We want to validate what we're doing. So I think that's definitely a thing. Also, this slower life, moment by moment, can feel good. There are simple pleasures within it. A lot of people talk about, you know, rushing around less, you know, those sorts of things. We can genuinely see upside in it. And so, yeah, we endorse it.
Yeah. Okay, so that's the situation. It's messy. There's a lot of things that are still not right, but somehow we're managing to kind of find a path through that and somewhat enjoy that path. And of course, it's sort of the perfect time of year to be enjoying that sort of slow life, and the sun has helped as well. But here's the thing, and it is a significant complication, Laura, we want more.
Yeah,
we do.
We absolutely do. I mean, when we ran Hello 2023, we talked about this being a year where we had kind of bigger hopes. And I think there is a sense of there's got to be more than walking.
Yeah, absolutely. That's a really good example of how anticipatory we are, because we were right on that, weren't we? I mean, people didn't get to do much more, but they did want to do more. So the upshot of where we're at, and we tell ourselves we want the slow, simple life, but the slow, simple life saves us money, is very safe. But if we're really honest about it, it's a bit boring. And we can see that endorsed on the left-hand side, can't we? Right up to when you get to 65 plus, then more people agree with that sentiment than don't agree with it. And because we're kind of coping, it's a fairly okay life, but it's not the perfect life, we continue to do a lot of reassessment. We can see that on the right hand side. And again, astonishing really, after all of the reassessment that the pandemic has prompted, we are at peak reassessment here and now.
Yeah, absolutely. We keep managing to find room for more.
I mean, I posted that on LinkedIn and it didn't get that much endorsement, but I think, come on, that is so significant. Like, it's a massive bit of insight hidden in plain sight there. It's astonishing, I think. So very, very significant fact. The even more significant point about this reassessment is it's beginning to come from a different sort of emotion. So cast back to October, the bars are the proportion of people reassessing life. That was the time of the energy increase, the second energy increase. We had very low levels of people thinking the next 12 months were going to be better. And so that reassessment was sparked from a position of despair, despondency. Very low optimism, falling optimism during that time. What we've now got is reassessment, but a point in time where we think that life might be better in 12 months' time. So it's coming from a position of hope. Very, very different sort of backdrop and pool that brands are playing in.
Yeah, absolutely. I think, we were thinking about needs. What can I cut back? What can I hold off? Now it's a bit more about wants. It's a bit more about what might be possible. How can I carve a slice of this? That sort of sensation.
Yeah. So position of hope. Now, there is a big but on the next slide. And again, it looks innocuous as a data point, but I think really, really important to look at as a data point. So we've got peak reassessing going on. Now, presumably people reassess because they're not happy with their goals and they're kind of trying to create new goals in life. But when on a completely different part of the survey, we ask them about clarity on life goals, they're no clearer on their goals than the total population. So we've got over half the population reassessing, but no more clarity about what that reassessment is for. Now, I think that, again, is a brilliant insight hidden in plain sight. You could just pass that by and think that's a nothing, but it's not. It's massive.
No, that's the reason we called this event ProcrastiNation. I mean, that's exactly what we're finding. If you're constantly reassessing, you would expect some level of clarity, of goal setting, or of kind of knowing where you're aiming to. And we just see that be completely flat. I think there's a sense of everything's on the table or sort of nothing's on the table. There's an element of vagueness. We can list a lot of things, but what are we really actually working towards? That's where we feel kind of quite clouded.
Yeah, it's a really, really important chart to remember. Now, a more significant build on it is when we take a look at the people reassessing life and kind of look at the things that they might be doing or putting off doing, we see a very, very clear pattern emerge. So,
just trying to get rid of that bar.
I think it's upsetting you.
Yeah.
Upset on many fronts. The temperature, the bar, it's delicate down, aren't you? You're a proper artiste, you are. Anyway, people reassessing life versus not reassessing life, what they may or may not be putting off. So what we discover on the left-hand side of the slide here, that people who are reassessing life tend not to put off today's things. They want to do stuff, don't they? They want to feel busy, like they're going to make change. But what they don't get round to doing is the things that would actually genuinely move them forward in life. And that is why we call this
ProcrastiNation. Yeah, I've talked a lot about that whole effort versus effect thing, that's one of the reasons why we're so exhausted, that we've been trying so much and seeing so kind of few results. Well, the stuff on the left hand side, you absolutely see results from, don't you? The problem is it's never ending. You're never laundry basket zero for very long, whereas on the other side you could genuinely be making headway, but you don't see the impact right now. I think that's exactly the issue.
So that's attention, that's a problem to be solved for people. Another thing we've discovered actually is the fact that we're kind of forced to live a bit more in the moment, to think what we're going to do today, we'll go for a walk today, actually reduces the number of midterm goals that we have in our life. What we've discovered, that the unintended consequence of that is that you don't have things to aim for, and in having nothing to aim for, you don't sort of have constraints, you don't have a horizon.
Yeah, I think that they are very important. They keep us, they're just focused enough, aren't they? They aren't so far out that we can't feel the impact of them. We can picture the deadline, we can picture the winning feeling of having to manage to make something happen, but they're far enough out that we don't get so wobbled by what's happened today, a difficult day, or tempted to kind of break from what we said. And so this very sort of short horizon means we're sort of thrown around in the storm quite a lot.
Much more thrown around, and and therefore maybe again go towards the kind of things that could do today. And we understand this, don't we? We recognize in ourselves when we ask people about what does put you off things, lack of motivation and clear start allows you to basically just say tomorrow, fosters inactivity.
Yeah, it helps us kind of delay. I think it doesn't give us the sort of chance to actually step forward if you get a bit sort of stuck.
Yeah. Okay, the next chart is full. A lot to take in. We will unpick this, and remember, you can have the slides, so you don't need to try and take notes of everything that's on it. So we've got a chart here, horizontal axis. There's a number of people who feel that these are things in life that they kind of want to be on top of, want to do. Then on the vertical axis, we look at people's propensity to put these things off. And so, of course, the things, the top right-hand side, are things that are very important because a lot of people want to do them, but we're very inclined on the whole to kind of put these things off. Bottom right-hand side are the things that we want to do, but we kind of tend to get on with those. And incidentally, they're the kind of things that sort of trip us up, I suppose, aren't they? We're drawn to the hare they're doing today rather than thinking more slowly and taking the more considered route. So there is an awful lot of things on there. Laura, you spent a good amount of time sort of unpicking it, and it turned out there was very clear kind of territories within that. So walk us through some of these territories.
Well, naturally, everything in the blue is what we've talked about, is impact kind of today. We can really kind of see and feel a kind of result right here, right now. We're drawn to those. I think some of the yellows are really interesting. Some of those really big sort of step forwards. I think when we think about this moment where there are so many kind of alternative paths, and I know we're going to come on to talk about that, we aren't making those steps or starting to think about those bigger steps. One of the areas that really sort of shone out to me is, we wanted more this year, we want more now, our life feels a bit boring, and yet one of the things that we put off doing is anything that's about sort of newness and discovery, which I think shows us just how difficult, how easy it is to get trapped, how difficult it is to get out of it.
Yeah, and then the things that are top right-hand side, what would be your observation on those?
Well, health. I think difficult again. I guess the impact habits is delayed, isn't it? We don't sort of, we might see or feel the impact of it 5, 10, 15 years in the future. So actually kind of maintaining that is difficult.
Yeah. And also in our fragile state there, sort of facing some of our own demons. So I think the key point here though is we all put off a lot of things. Quite a lot of it depends on us personally, but also the context with which that is happening in. So big question for brands, I think, is how can you help in a good way? Obviously, it would be possible to kind of take advantage of people in these vulnerable states, but we're not those sort of girls, are we? We want to dwell on how brands could positively help consumers in their lives. And so we've got, I think, 4 sort of territories. The first one that we feel quite strongly about actually is a moment for brands to be more mentors than coaches. What's the distinction?
Well, I think that this distinction is important when we're in this slightly aimless state. And the real distinction is direction. We're open to experimenting, we're open to moving forward, we're open to reassessment, but we are tired. We want success, I think, and a spotlight on where we can go rather than being able to explore anywhere is really important. I've got so many people in the community talking about a range of things, from quite serious challenges to quite fun things, about maybe planning a holiday or something like that. And they're really perplexed, they're not sure where to take it. Everyone's just like, just do what you feel, just do what's right for you. And they don't they don't want that. They want like a, if I was you,
on one level they do, don't they? Because I see on LinkedIn, you know, be kind to yourself. You'll get a billion endorsements of that. And
yeah,
so
because
it's the story we want to hear, but we probably really need more of the directive help.
Yeah, I think so. And if you know, I've been in that situation in the past. This is what I've, you know, I think that feels really good. I think we want a chance at success, and I think direction is the thing that we want. So rather than more questions, we want to close that down. We want to take some things off the table, really focus on some things, find some solution around them, get some recommendations.
So mentor, not coach, number one thing. The second thing is to get people focused on the important. And by important, we're of course talking about things a lot that are at the top right-hand side of the chart for everybody. And of course, there are some people who want to be doing some of the important things on the top left-hand side of that chart we were just looking at. But the things that are difficult, that require planning, these are the things we tend to put off till tomorrow.
Yeah, and they're the things that can make an enormous impact, but their impact isn't seen kind of right here, right now. So I think getting us starting to think about those sorts of things, and maybe helping us break them down so that we actually start to see progress, we see effect quickly.
Yeah, absolutely. And the truth is, we're probably drawn to the not urgent, not important. You know, you could argue hoovering up, sort of, you know, to a point, can sit in that category. House doesn't make it absolutely spotless if you've not got, you know, a will or a financial plan, or, you know, those sorts of things in place. Okay, so focus on the important, and then critically show us how. I mean, this is a build on the mentoring, isn't it? But in showing us how, what are some of the golden rules, do you think?
I think there's got to be something that's realistic about it. It's got to feel doable. It's got to feel sort of possible, not kind of over aspirational. I think being really curated about things. We don't need 100 or 1,000 or 84, and the 76th one is going forage for wild garlic. I think we need something that is kind of really focused, where we're getting the biggest benefit from doing the smallest thing, that 80-20 principle or whatever it is, really kind of narrowing our options, rather than, nobody needs another life hack. We don't need to screenshot anything else and save it down. We don't need to read another book. We just need to get moving. And I think also role models are so important. We talk about, different parts. We've had so many different sections in the school recently about that. We looked at renters recently and some of their needs around home. And I think there's so many different ways people are experiencing things, and yet our role models are so homogenous. I think that actually having something that feels aspirational but real, reflective is important.
Absolutely. And then the final thing is, these things, the top right hand side, are very difficult things to keep going with, because it requires steady progress over a long period of time and deferred gratification. So really important that brands find ways to kind of keep us going and encouraging us.
Yeah.
Okay, so we could say that's job done. We're over 37 minutes, but it isn't that simple, is it? And one size doesn't fit all. There's not one problem facing the whole nation. And that is why on the score, Laura, we spend a lot of time looking at subgroups within the total picture.
Yeah, we're always kind of investigating the kind of crux of the opportunity and how that is manifesting differently. Subscribers who are watching this might be suddenly thinking, whoa, what's this? I haven't seen this before. This is a sort of random sneak peek of our updated portal that is coming in autumn, which we are very excited about. But just wanted to show you the kind of different ways in which we tend to cut things and look at things. But yeah, extremely exciting portal launching.
It is. It's all the more exciting because we've used AI, haven't we, to trawl through every single report and tag it with content. They've been through every video and created summary text. I mean, it's clever stuff.
It's very clever.
Done. Cut them all up into subgroups. So so we're excited about it and the way that we've managed to do it as well.
Yeah, but this will make some of our subgroup even stronger, because we'll be able to, the tags and things like that, so it'll be searchable. But yeah,
and also I think it will mean all of our backstories are so much easier for people to get hold of as well. Anyway, that's aside, we drill down, and so today we're going to look at one lens of looking at the different problems within the population that are able to be solved by brands. And we're going to simply take kind of a generational age kind of cut across the nation, which obviously has quite a strong kind of life stage orientation to it as well. So the first group we're looking at is under 35s. And really, we believe the challenge for brands here is reinvention. Some of the old, they can't go back to how life used to be, not before the cost of living crisis, not before pandemic, and even before that, these things were happening. It's just accelerated it to some extent. So the big macro picture here is an element of reinvention is needed. Now, we talk about good brands do good things for people, and we feel it's really important for this group that brands do good things for them, because as a group, they tend to be very positive that life is going to work out okay for them. And we can see in terms of their net optimism, it's higher than in the other groups, and also just kind of tend to put things off, much more likely to do that. So they kind of and often have beat a path through life where things do happen to them. You go to school, you take an exam, you go to university, things happen to you. You don't have to make things happen in quite the same way.
Yeah,
I think that's fair.
absolutely. Yeah, and I think there's a lot of sort of shared milestones, and so there is this sense that we're on a sort of you might feel on a similar trajectory to when you look left and right to your kind of peers or family members or whatever. And so yeah, I think there is a sort of sense of it will be good.
It'll work out. And so brands really do need to kind of help, I think, this group in particular. And they need to help them because the world has changed so rapidly around them. As I say, not only just over the last 2 or 3 years, but in the decade really leading up to that. And we can see on the left-hand side, what it means is there are some aspects of life which are just inherently harder for this group than the generations that went before them. We see particularly around housing, sustainability, and the economy as well. And Laura, these are massive kind of threats to the things that you might have thought you wanted in life that you might not be able to have in life.
Well, yeah, these are things that you've seen other people have, maybe in your life, maybe in movies, maybe in books, like whatever it is. But these are well-trodden sort of stories that are starting to be questioned. Where will I live if I don't own my own home? What does my sort of financial backing actually look like? If we're saving, should we be putting that into, I don't know, advanced sort of like training, or should we be putting that into a house deposit, or should we spend it on a wedding? I have this job and my boss phones me once a week, and other than that, I never see them or anyone. This feels difficult. Will travel be only for rich people? I didn't take a gap year. Does that mean I've missed out on it forever? You know, these sorts of questions. This is like anxious
And very much at a crossroads, aren't they? I think we've got bigger questions that generations before just took for granted. They just were able to kind of keep moving forward. And I think even on something like health, we see somewhat of a crossroads occurring, don't we? With hugely polarizing attitudes across health, with, you know, some absolute, you know, extreme clean living through to kind of the opposite extreme.
Really sort of conflicting things. I don't know that they always experience or kind of feel the conflict in it, but yeah, absolutely, from sort of taking cold showers to being teetotal to then having very kind of extreme behaviors on the other side. And that's what it is, I guess. It's very polarizing.
Yeah. On another session, cold showers, we're going to talk about those and how many people are taking them. I listened to a brilliant podcast on the weekend on dopamine and the importance of things like that. Anyway, very polarizing, a crossroads in life. Alongside that, there is social media having this massive impact on this cohort of people. And they are a living experiment, aren't they, of the impact of something like that. And we're not adapted to be able to cope with it. We pull out one example here in terms of teeth. And Laura, you know, we were shocked by this, I think.
These pictures make me feel unwell. But yeah, I think that, yeah, this is a moment whereby our standards have been warped. What we think is normal is warped. And so we start to believe these images that we're seeing, and we see more problems within ourselves because of the images we've been fed. I think the challenging thing across all of this is it's such part of our conversation, isn't it? It's such part of narrative wherever we look, whether that's on the news or kind of whatever. And people will tell me, oh, you can't believe everything that you see online. But what we're seeing is we are. And the worst thing is we're tricking ourselves thinking that we're not believing it, but we completely are suckers to it, just like everybody else.
Yeah, we can't control it. So very significant there. And another impact, I think, of all of the sort of tech on our lives is attention deficit. We have always very often got 2, maybe 3 screens vying for our attention, and pings coming in all manner of directions. It really means that we struggle for focus. We recognize that in ourselves. And of course, that's highest in the age groups that are most exposed to social media. And Laura, just reflect for a moment on the right-hand side about those Google searches for ADHD.
I mean, it's incredible to see that on that graph, isn't it? That hike. And I think there's been a lot of debate around this issue, to the difficulty of it, of being on a platform that's showing kind of 10-30-second videos, and then sort of highlighting some of the sort of symptoms and experiences of those with ADHD could really kind of maybe warp your perceptions of it.
Yeah, absolutely. And I posted that, I think, on LinkedIn, didn't I? And a really honest post from somebody I know personally who we used to work with, the most sane person, you know, on this planet, who said, yeah, I can really recognize this in myself. So attention deficit, a real problem. So Laura, we talked about some of the challenges there. Again, thinking about good brands doing good things for consumers. What are the winning territories here?
I think there's a huge thing about role models for this group, and resilience is a word that gets sort of over talked maybe, but I do think there's an element of realness for this group. I picked out the Gymshark guy who, you know, they had difficult sales and he's on BBC News. I mean, that is real resilience, isn't it? I think also kind of the women's football, kind of new role models, emerging role models, real sort of power and a sense of kind of challenging things. I also think really like planning, just goal setting, just looking at the problem. How much do you actually need to save to do that? What would that actually look like? Can you start investing? Can you start doing these sort of things? I think, you know, on a practical kind of day-to-day level, incredible value, really challenging some of the mechanics around it. You know, Beauty Pie would be a brand that do that give you access to very kind of low price points on luxury beauty by taking out a load of the chain, like the packaging and the marketing and those sort of things. Same with vintage, you know, basically buying recycled clothes.
What is Nude? I've never heard of that.
So. Nude is a thing that helps you understand what you might need for a house. So you put in what you're looking for, how much you could start saving. It will tell you literally it's going to take you 3 years and 9 months to do it. This is what you need to put aside. And I think it just helps size the problem. I think what's really important about some of these things is we can't even anticipate the questions that some of these people are wondering and asking, and so really sort of safe ways to experiment. I think they're quite drawn to calculators and what ifs, because really there are sort of so many different ways in which they could take things. I think that actually having a bit of some advice paired with me being able to experiment is very powerful, which is why I think so much fintech really takes off this group.
Yeah, that's okay. So that is our youngest. Well, actually nearly. Just saying that good brands can do good things, but the truth is this group probably needs some protection from the extremes of digital impact, and we look at that in many different ways there. Still struggling with the temperature.
I'm so warm.
Okay, that is our youngest cohort. Let's move on to families now. And we feel that they are still very much in the survival mode, and recovery is going to be a little bit further down the way for this particular group. The obvious thing is having children is difficult. I mean, it is. Your money gets squeezed and your time also is no longer your own. And you can see that on the left-hand side, the proportion of people by age group who've got a mortgage, of course, it peaks in family age groups, and your savings are under pressure. So it feels sort of financially a vulnerable time in the best of circumstances. But layer on top of that inflation, and it's a toxic combination. And so top left-hand side, that inflation is growing at 10%. Well, it's astonishing across the total population how few people know that as a fact. But if you kind of move into sort of early family years, typically 35, 44, only a quarter of them actually recognize that inflation is in that sort of territory. And so no wonder when we ask them about their financial situation, they don't say it's very stable. Now, Laura, what this does is people feel they're failing, don't they? Because they don't recognize that they just don't know the game.
Yeah, if you're walking uphill and you've got no idea it's on if you're actually going uphill, that's a horrible sensation, isn't it? And I think that, yeah, this is exactly it. These are the moments that people say to me things like, oh, we're just terrible at budgeting, let myself down again, I'm going to be better at it next month, I'm so useless, I'm this. And that's because they don't realize the game suddenly got very, very, very hard. And I think
it was a hard game anyway. Yeah. So the hills got higher, steeper, and don't always recognize it. And so if we look at this next chart and track the finances of families, we don't think the misery really is over for them. So this chart shows the proportion of people who say they're terrified about their finances. Now go back to Freedom Day. Actually, lockdown was very good on families. They weren't able to do very much, spend very much money. It actually just helped them really get on top of their finances. So at that moment in time, families versus kind of non-families, a relatively narrow gap. As we were able to get out and do things, the gap kind of widened. And you really noticed that, didn't you? People will just say, you know, money's slipping through my fingers. And so we saw them get more worried about it. Then March 2022 came along, the first energy hike, they got more worried. And then the second energy hike in November kind of really pulled away from non-family groups. We can see non-family groups kind of easing in terms of being terrified about finances. They've learned how to play the quiet life game. It's much harder for families to play the quiet life, isn't it? In point of fact,
really is.
hard.
They've just got greater demands. They can't go with the lowest internet package because they genuinely need that level of broadband to cope with everyone's homework and whatever else it is. You know, I've had so many people talk to me about, oh my goodness, when did school get so expensive? Just like normal school, like it used to be every now and again. Now it seems to be every month there's something, and it's kind of catching me off guard. That's let alone people that have got kids in kind of nursery school or something like that. I think it just feels very tricky.
Much harder, absolutely. And so as a cohort of people, we think they are focused on surviving today, here and now, and that is going to continue for a very long period of time. And surviving today basically is trying to manage the daily demands and everyone kind of wanting their piece of flesh from you, but coping with money worries and the fact that money worries make it much harder to have dreams to kind of look forward to, and perpetually have to say no to children, which is a terrible feeling for most parents. And so at any point in history, compromises would have been part of family life, but here and now, those compromises have just crossed a line.
Yeah, they really have. And I think this is where it starts to feel not us. You know, I encourage my kids to eat healthily, and yet actually find themselves serving up kind of beige food, feeling bad about that, cancelling charity donations, taking kids out of school and just seeing the fine as a holiday expense. You know, even feeling like they're not quite themselves in their own home, feeling like, you know, ideally by now we'd have moved. We didn't want the second one while we were only in a 2-bedroom place, but we are, you know, that kind of sensation. It's kind of, this isn't what I do, but it is what I'm doing, and that we're starting to be kind of defined differently. So these hurt, these compromises.
Yeah, they're difficult on your self-esteem, aren't they? I mean, we've talked about inequalities, but of course, the inequalities are greatest in families where you get the most pressure in terms of the finances. And so it's the low income families where you get a lot of single parent families where things are particularly difficult and the horizon is really pulled into almost single day.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, look what's happened at sort of the more basic elements of food. Inflation's the average, isn't it? It's not what's happening to sort of dried pasta or something like that. Look what's happening in rental. Yeah, you can really feel that they're vulnerable.
Yeah. And so the truth is, for brands, families need encouragement. They are under pressure to deliver almost everything more than average for the population. So it is a much more sort of grind it out sort of existence, and the pressure is going to continue as long as inflation is high. And Laura, I think just a final couple of slides on this group. Firstly, getting them out of the house is really important. We can see enjoyment of trips out the house is really skyrocketed over the last couple of weeks as the sun has come out. But we can see over the last year, as the cost of living crisis has intensified, families in particular have enjoyed their time out of the house.
Because the change of scene is energizing.
It's actually horizon.
Yeah, it really is. It really is. I think this is that moment where we are absolutely having a sense of newness, of discovery. I mean, almost every level we look at with families, that's what they're kind of aching for. And so this is a way to have a kind of small taste of it.
Absolutely. Okay, so let's finish off. For good brands wanting to do good things for families, what should they be helping?
Well, I think getting some of that fun. You know, these are important years. These are times where we want them to be defining of a kid's age or our life stage or those sorts of things. I think ways to have that is important. And new sort of mechanics on value, or leaning into different ones like memberships. You know, there's Merlin passes or zoo passes, that kind of thing. No frills things where they kind of know exactly what they're getting, but it absolutely enables them to have a couple of days at the seaside, moments where they can say yes. They do so much negotiating and thinking and questioning, so all inclusive kind of price points and things like that feel important. I think really heroing good over perfection, you know, a couple of notches down is kind of good enough, really feeling on their side, I think. But also I think there's practical needs around their space and their homes, and they're loving getting out, but home remains important, and it really is.
And they can't move.
Squeeze.
Yeah, so they can't, under squeeze. Okay, let's finish off empty nesters. And I think our summation for them is they kind of want a different ending now. Their dreams have just sort of, I think, crystallized along the lines that they perhaps hadn't quite anticipated. So look at optimism, really, I think, significant sort of chart just to look at here. Under 55s, over 55. So remember, over 55s generally much more aware of the news and the implications of the news. And we see that play out in terms of optimism all the way through. So look at Freedom Day. Freedom Day came, they were not very keen really of restrictions ending. They felt personally more vulnerable around COVID. And so optimism kind of really dipped for them after Freedom Day. We then got to March 22. They recognized inflation, had lived through periods of inflation in their life before. And again, another nod to optimism, because they could see what was to come. And then around the winter energy bills, again, lower optimism at that point. Now, it's interesting because at all of those points, particularly around the money, they were fine. They actually did have more savings to get themselves through it. They just recognized the risk at those moments.
Yeah.
And
now
things looking up.
Yeah, now I think they find themselves kind of on the winning side. They've got a bit more in savings. They're feeling kind of slightly more established financially. And I think also they've had a taste of, you know, life is short, things have changed. And that's given them almost a burst of energy and a sense of, I'm going to do this.
Yeah. And I think critically, they've seen the simple life. And actually, it does suit them. It's okay. They've done often what they want to do in life. They don't want to take on lots of new challenges and discovery. So they've had a taste of genuinely the good life for them.
Yeah, and I think that is that sort of sensation of, you know, how you spend your days is how you spend your life, and they're liking this kind of quite kind of wholesome, fulfilling, contented, simple
existence. Absolutely. And you hear a lot of slightly older people say this, don't they, that a happy life is a healthy life. And of course, I think that's really kind of come into focus for two reasons. Firstly, they recognise just the squeeze the NHS is under, so they can't take health and healthcare for granted from that perspective. But I think through the pandemic, they saw people die, and they also saw what happens to people at end of life in terms of living in retirement homes. And so they've got these very kind of big visual reference points that influences their sort of hopes and dreams here and now.
Yeah, and they are vivid, I think.
Really
they really are sort of burnt in. And so I think there is a sort of, what do you call it, renewed sense that this is important.
Yeah, absolutely. But doesn't mean to say they've not got big questions about money.
No, I think there's loads of questions about money. I think they can see that they might be experiencing some inheritance. I think then they're sort of starting to question how much inheritance they want to pass on to their kids. Could I be getting out of the work game kind of earlier? Could we have a different kind of retirement? What sort of thing do I need for care? Where would I want to be living? What could we do with the house? I think there's just a lot of big questions. And in some of the other groups, they really are recreating, especially those younger ones, completely new paths, carving out new paths. These guys really are deviating from a well-trodden path.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think they will be doing quite a lot of more conscious thinking about it as well, because they're less inclined to put off to tomorrow by this age group. So the opportunity for brands here is really to help people have a content end into life, help them enjoy being at home, protected and feeling safe. So tell us some winning territories for good brands.
Well, there's got to be loads around health. Many of them do have a financial buffer, and so they will be willing to pay their way out of it. Some sort of serious health, other more sort of preventative rather than curative. And I think also some freedom. I think kind of holidays and travel and those sorts of things, being under my own steam, will feel important. I think again their home will be very kind of central. neutral, and actually maybe having a little kind of inch of luxury within there. I think sort of challenging convention as well. What does really kind of happy, contented care look like? Not kind of constraint, and more of a sort of
from a home point of view.
From sort of more luxury kind of perspective. And also inheritance conversations. One of our responses to Daniel Craig, you said that inheritance ruins kids, and actually there's an interest in that sort of conversation because it's something they'd quite like to consider doing this.
Absolutely. Okay, Laura, we are bang on time, which is astonishing. Well done us. So go on, finish off. Just tell people, remind people what people the score is and how they get hold of these slides.
We will send you these slides. The score looks at all sorts of different topics every single week. You can access them on a weekly, fortnightly or monthly basis. We are forever unpicking what's happening now and where things are moving next. And so, yes, you will hear from us and get links to everything we've talked about today.
Very good. Well, that's it. Bang on time.
We've got a whole minute, Alison. What would you like to do?
You can sort the air conditioning out.
Hang on at 53 minutes. Brilliant.
Okay. Cheerio then.
See you soon.